The day my husband died, I expected to find a few old photo albums, a few dusty keepsakes. But in the dark attic, I pulled out a faded photograph, a little girl standing in front of the very house I once lived in, clutching a teddy bear. What sent a chill down my spine wasn't that innocent smile. It was the scrawled message on the back. To Mom, I will come back when the time comes. I had never given birth to a daughter. I held the photo in my hands, my heart racing, feeling both familiar and strange. The girl's face stirred something deep in my memory. But the more I tried to recall, the hazier it became. I was 66 years old and had spent my life with only one son. So why did this photo exist? Why was there a message written in ink, blurred by the years? Yet the handwriting looked so much like my own. In that moment, I didn't know whether I was facing a cruel joke, a buried secret, or some fragment of memory I had lost long ago. And from that second on, my life turned onto a completely different path. I sat motionless for a long time on the attic floor, light streaking through the dusty window slats and casting pale bands across the trembling photograph in my hands. My fingers kept grazing the writing on the back, as if by touching it long enough, I would find the answer. But all it did was make me more confused. Good God. Robert, I whispered, eyes lifting to the ceiling. What were you hiding from me, Robert? My husband had always been a private man. He didn't like to talk, didn't like to show emotion. He kept all the bills, ledgers, and important papers. I was used to trusting him, to not asking questions. Maybe that's why, after 45 years of marriage, I never once suspected anything was being hidden. And yet now, that old photograph made me doubt everything. I decided I had to find out. If this was a joke, I needed to know who was behind it. If it was true, then the life I thought I knew might only be a thin veil. I took the photo down to the first floor and laid it neatly on the oak dining table. My hand smoothed along the polished wood edge, remembering all the times our family had gathered there. Memories flooded back, but they felt strange and distant, as if they belonged to another family. I began to search the china cabinet drawers where Robert usually kept old records. Papers were scattered, but something was wrong. Many sections had been torn out, leaving jagged bits of paper, as if someone had deliberately removed parts of the information. I carefully opened each folder and checked them one by one. In a stack of bank files, I found statements with months missing. Whole gaps of several months had been completely erased. I tilted my head, frowning. Robert was meticulous. He never did anything carelessly. These gaps could not be mere oversights. I kept looking. In the wooden box he stored in the basement, where he kept tax returns and insurance contracts, I noticed many pages were missing there too. Instead of feeling reassured, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I snapped. The box lid shut hard. The sound echoed through the cold basement. I wondered, did Robert have a parallel life I never knew about, a child he once cared for? Or some terrible mistake he chose to hide? Back in the living room, I sat in the old armchair and held the photograph to my chest. My eyes landed on the framed picture on the wall, our wedding photo. In it, I stood beside Robert, smiling brightly, full of hope for a simple future. I wondered if I had known about a secret like this back then. Would I have had the courage to marry him? The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, a familiar rhythm that now sounded like hammer blows into my heart. I decided to look for more clues where Robert often worked his desk in the study. The room still smelled of old wood and the faint tobacco he liked. The drawers were locked, but I knew he often left the key in the bookcase slot. I pulled it out and opened each drawer. Inside were neatly organized files. But the more I looked, the more unsettled I became. Many documents didn't match my recollection. For example, there was a life insurance purchase contract dated 1998. But I was certain we had decided to cancel the policy that year, because the premium was too high. I leafed through the folders until I found a thick envelope wedged between two old law books. I pulled it free. Dust rose and made me cough. Inside were a stack of yellowed papers, photocopies of a birth certificate. Money. Transfer receipts. Even an enrollment certificate from an elementary school I didn't recognize. The name printed bold across them all, Rachel Jennings. I gripped the edge of the paper so hard my palms broke out in sweat. Who was Rachel Jennings? Was she the little girl in the photograph? A flood of questions raced through my mind. If Robert was involved, why had he never told me? And why did these papers connect to me? That, to Mom on the back of the photo, clearly pointed to me and no one else. I could feel my heart pounding like a war drum. The house was silent, except for the wind howling outside and the soft rustle of paper in my hands. I suddenly felt like a witness in my own life, a life I had believed was peacefully closed, now cracking open to reveal an unfathomable darkness. I set the stack of papers aside and pressed my hand to my forehead. For years, Robert had told me not to worry about money, to concentrate on teaching and tending the home. He carried all the burdens. And I, foolishly, took that as an expression of love. But now I wondered, was that love only a curtain masking another story? My gaze drifted to the window, where moonlight spilled over the garden. I felt utterly lost in the home I'd known for decades. I had no choice. I had to know the truth, no matter how cruel it might be. I could not continue to live under the shadow of suspicion. And I knew the photograph was only the beginning of a long journey, a journey in which every step might bring me closer to a memory that had been erased, or to a truth powerful enough to shatter everything I had ever believed. I couldn't sleep that night. The clock's hands moved with tiny clicks that sounded like knocking inside my chest. I kept tossing and turning, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling, while the image of the old photograph and the name Rachel Jennings flashed through my mind. The more I thought, the more everything felt hazy and tangled. By dawn, I'd made up my mind I had to search further. I pulled on my old sweater and went down to the basement. The cellar smelled of the familiar dampness. But today, it felt like it held a whole other world I'd never known. I bent over the wooden cabinet where Robert usually kept his repair tools. The third drawer was stuck. I had to yank hard to get it open. A thick envelope, yellowed at the edges, fell to the floor with a dry, brittle sound. I picked it up and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a neatly clipped stack of bank papers. I recognized the familiar logo of the local bank we'd dealt with for years. The numbers were clear. For nearly 2 decades, there had been a fixed monthly transfer, $500. Payee Laura Jennings. I sank into the wooden chair in the basement, clutching the papers. A completely unfamiliar name. Yet it had appeared regularly in my husband's life for 20 years. Why I closed my eyes and remembered the times Robert was away, with excuses like bank work or board meetings. I never questioned him because he always came home on time. Still ate dinner with me. Still exchanged a few words about the news on TV. But now those memories felt like a veil of smoke hiding a different reality. I picked up the landline in the living room, hesitating. If I called the bank directly to ask, I might raise eyebrows, even suspicion. Robert had a good reputation. I didn't want to tarnish his name if this was only a misunderstanding. At the same time, I couldn't just sit still. I decided to write everything down carefully: dates, amounts, account numbers. My handwriting was shaky but clear, as if recording the facts would prove I wasn't dreaming. I put the pen down and murmured, "Laura Jennings, who are you?" The question hung in the air. I remembered a small detail years ago. Robert once received a parcel while I was in the kitchen. The sender had hastily written L.J. in the corner. I asked about it and he laughed it off. An old colleague. Don't worry about it. At the time I believed him and didn't give it another thought. Now, thinking back, I felt a chill. I stood and carried the envelope back to the living room. I placed it next to the little girl's photograph. and the two looked like puzzle pieces waiting to be put together. A mysterious little girl. A woman receiving regular payments for 20 years, both sharing the surname Jennings. I sat in silence, gripping the arm of the chair. The familiar room felt alien, the wall full of family photos, my and Robert's beaming smiles. Our sons suddenly seemed like masks hiding something I didn't yet understand. Outside, I heard cars passing. The usual peace of our small neighborhood. Inside me, there was no peace left. A thought flashed through my mind: if Laura Jennings were still alive, she must know why these payments were made. And if not, maybe someone her descendants would know. I needed to find a way to trace her. But how? I'd never heard Robert mention that name, except for that parcel years ago. No address. No phone number, only the name printed clearly on the bank statement. I sighed and smoothed the old photograph on the table. The little girl's smile shone bright and innocent, as if telling me I couldn't stop now. In my head, the two names repeated: Rachel, Laura, Jennings. What was their connection to Robert? To me. Why did that photograph call me Mom? I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had stepped into a maze, and to find my way out, I had to go to the very depths of it. The next step was to track down the woman named Laura Jennings, the woman who, perhaps, held one of the biggest secrets of my marriage. In the days that followed, I lived in a half-dream state. In the mornings, I still brewed coffee, still walked my old dog around the neighborhood like I had for years. Neighbors waved, and I nodded back. But inside, my mind was haunted by a single name: Laura Jennings. I began going through the papers in the old envelope. On a bank statement from 2003, I found a handwritten address in the bottom corner. That handwriting, I recognized it immediately, was Robert's. He had carefully noted it down, either so he wouldn't forget, or to mark something important. The address was in Vermont. I sat staring at the paper, feeling as though I had found the key to the first locked door. I had never set foot in Vermont, but Robert had. Years ago, he went on a week-long business trip there and returned, looking exhausted, but oddly brought me a silver necklace. Calling it a little gift, I had been touched and thought nothing more of it. Now, that memory pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. I pulled out a map and traced the route. The address led to a small town called Maplewood, nestled between green mountains and maple forests. The name sounded gentle and peaceful. But to me, it felt like the place hiding another part of Robert's life. After several sleepless nights, I decided I had to go. I packed a few clothes, the little girl's photograph, and the stack of papers into a small bag. Before leaving, I stood before the small altar where Robert's photo rested and whispered, "Robert, if you're still here, I hope you understand. I need to know the truth. I deserve to know." The bus ride lasted nearly 8 hours. I sat by the window, watching forest after forest roll past, my thoughts in turmoil. Every roar of the engine only made me more anxious. I wondered when I arrived, what would I face? A woman who had once been my husband's lover, or another family he had hidden from me all these years? When the bus stopped at the tiny Maplewood station, I stepped off and drew in a deep breath. The air was fresh, laced with pine resin and the warm scent of baked goods from a nearby shop. The town was truly peaceful, with neat wooden houses lining the main street. No one knew I had brought a storm inside me. I followed the address. It led to a small white house with a red roof. Standing quietly at the end of the street, the windows were shut tight, the porch coated in dust, weeds growing through the path. Clearly, no one had lived there for a long time. I slowed, my heart sinking. I had hoped to knock and hear a woman's voice answer, so I could ask directly, "Are you Laura Jennings?" Instead, I only heard the wind rustling through the trees. An older woman stepped out of the neighboring house, carrying a basket of laundry. She looked at me, cautious but kind. I asked softly. Excuse me. Do you know who used to live in this house? The woman set the basket down, wiped her hands on her apron, and nodded. This was Mrs. Laura Jennings' home, but she passed away. More than 5 years ago. I froze. My voice caught in my throat. She passed away, yes, from an illness. I remember it well. The whole town mourned her. Laura was gentle, private, but always willing to help her neighbors. I swallowed hard, clutching the strap of my bag. The questions that had consumed me now collapsed into a heavy emptiness. Laura was gone, which meant I could never hear the truth from her own lips. The neighbor hesitated, then added, "But she had a daughter, Rachel. She's grown now. Lives not far from here." My heart tightened. Rachel. The name I had seen in the papers. The name I had repeated in my mind for days. I drew a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Do you know where I can find Rachel?" The woman smiled faintly and pointed toward the road leading out of town. "She rents a small house near the lake. About a 15-minute walk." I thanked her, then stood for a long moment before the empty house. On the porch, an old wooden chair still sat, one piece of its back broken. As if waiting for someone to return, I touched it gently, imagining the presence of a woman I had never known, but who, somehow, had already stepped into my life. Then I turned away. Each step down the tree-lined road toward the lake felt heavy. I didn't know what I would say when I met Rachel. Should I pretend to be just a stranger? Or admit that I was the wife of the man who had sent her mother money for 20 years? The breeze from the lake carried the damp scent of leaves. In the distance, a small blue house appeared. Simple but bright. I stood staring, my heart pounding. The wooden door suddenly opened. A young woman stepped onto the porch, her brown hair tied back hastily, her frame delicate, but her eyes sharp and alert. I knew instantly this was Rachel Jennings, and in that moment, I realized all my questions. All the secrets I had carried from that dusty attic were about to be tested against the truth Rachel held. I walked slowly closer, my shoes crunching on the gravel path. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, her gaze sharp but with a hint of confusion. As if my appearance was at once expected and unexpected, I started to speak, my voice trembling but controlled. "Sorry to intrude. Are you Rachel Jennings?" She nodded slightly, her deep brown eyes never leaving me. I took a breath and continued. "I'm Kathy Miller. I used to be Robert Miller's wife." In an instant, her face changed. She stepped back, as if startled, gripping the wooden doorframe to steady herself. Her lips pressed together, then parted as she whispered, "Robert Miller, he was your husband." I nodded, my heart tightening at her reaction. In Rachel's eyes, I saw surprise mixed with a deep, private hurt, like an old scar torn open. She stood silent for a few seconds, then suddenly opened the door wider and said softly, "Please come in." The little house was warm, scented with herbal tea and dried pine. I crossed the threshold, feeling both strange and oddly at home. Rachel motioned for me to sit in the armchair by the window and disappeared for a moment. When she returned, she held a battered stuffed bear, its fur threadbare, but its plastic eyes still bright. I froze. It was the same teddy bear from the photograph I had found in the attic. Rachel set the bear on the table, her voice hoarse but steady. "This is the most precious thing my mother left behind. She used to say that one day the woman in the old photo would come looking for me, and that I had to trust her, even if I didn't understand why." I sat in silence, my hand trembling as I reached out and touched the bear. The vague feeling stirring inside me rose again, like a faint memory gently knocking from somewhere. I looked up and met Rachel's eyes. "Rachel, can you tell me, what did your mother ever say?" The young woman hugged the bear tight, her eyes wet but resolute. My mother said she once loved a man who already had a family. He was the reason we received money for all those years. But she also mentioned another woman. That woman wasn't an enemy. She was part of the story. Rachel paused, then stared at me. That woman was you. I felt my face flush. I shook my head instinctively. No. I never met your mother. I never knew. My voice broke. Because at that moment, I remembered the unsent letters. The handwriting identical to mine that I had found in Laura's old chest. A piece of memory worn away. Or a truth buried too skillfully. Rachel looked at me as if reading the confusion in my eyes. She pushed the bear toward me and said softly, I don't expect you to have the answers right away. But I believe, if my mother said that, there must be a reason. Outside, the lake breeze swept against the window, rustling the leaves. The room felt taut with silence. I bowed my head, my heart full of conflict. On one hand, I felt pulled into a story that didn't belong to me. On the other, every trace, the photograph, the letters. And now this teddy bear pointed straight at me, forcing me to admit I couldn't walk away. My voice was thin. Rachel, I need time. But I promise I will find out the truth. She nodded, then suddenly stood and opened a small cabinet drawer. From inside she took out an old wooden box and set it in front of me. These are the letters my mother wrote but never sent. Some have your name on them. I thought you should read them. I looked at the box and slowly lifted the lid. Dozens of envelopes lay neatly inside. The paper yellowed with age. On several envelopes, the familiar handwriting had my name, Kathy. A chill ran through me. I trembled as I picked up one and slowly slid the paper free. The handwriting was soft, each line seeming to dance across the page. Dear Kathy, if one day you read these lines, please believe that everything I did was for the little girl. I trust you will understand. And then the time will come when you will come back to find Rachel. Each word felt like a blade against my heart. I let the letter fall, tears welling. I looked up at Rachel, whose eyes were also rimmed with tears. In that moment, in the small room of a stranger, Rachel and I looked at each other in silence. Between us, a thread had been tied, a thread Laura had perhaps woven years before. And I understood that from this moment on, my journey was no longer only about finding answers for myself. It was also about answering for a young woman who carried the past her mother had entrusted to me, a past still full of pieces that had not yet been put together. Rachel sat across from me, still clutching the teddy bear as if it were the only charm left from her childhood. Her eyes flickered with a mix of longing to know the truth and fear of hearing what she didn't want. I hesitated, then sighed. Rachel, everything I know so far, it all started with the old photo and the papers I found after my husband died. I never once heard him mention you or your mother. Rachel frowned, her voice trembling. That can't be. My mother said you knew everything. That you chose silence. That you were part of this story too. I froze. Her words cut straight into my heart. I repeated them slowly, as if I had to hear them aloud to believe them. She said, I chose silence. Rachel gave a faint nod, her gaze distant. She told me you once faced the truth. That you knew Robert had a daughter outside his marriage. But you didn't expose it. You didn't leave him. Instead, you let it sink into the shadows. As long as your family appeared intact. I went rigid, unable to speak. For years, I had believed I knew my husband, that I understood our marriage. And now, here was the daughter I had never met, telling me that I had known and that I had chosen to hide it. I shook my head, my voice trembling. Rachel, if there was ever such a memory, then I don't recall it at all. I didn't know. I didn't choose silence. I only just discovered all this. Just like you. She stared at me, as though searching my eyes for a trace of a lie. But I couldn't lie. I was too exhausted to pretend. Rachel turned away, her voice thick. You know, growing up without a real father, I got used to it. But what haunted me was the look in my mother's eyes whenever she saw me. She never blamed me. But I could feel her sorrow. She always said, Rachel, some truths aren't always told. But one day, you'll meet the person you're meant to meet. I believed she meant you. Kathy. I stayed silent, listening only to the wind, rattling the window frame, and the creak of the old floorboards beneath us. In my mind, Robert appeared, his quiet smile, his familiar stance. What had he hidden from me? And why? Softly, almost to myself, I said, if what your mother said was true, then maybe there's a part of the story I missed. Maybe my memory erased it. Or maybe he buried it so deep that even I couldn't reach it. Rachel turned back to me, her eyes no longer just suspicious but fragile, like a child yearning for answers. So, what will you do? She asked. I clenched my hands, trying to steady myself. I'll find the truth. I don't know where it will take us. But I don't want you to carry this vague pain forever. And I can't go on living with these empty spaces in my own memory. Rachel pressed her lips together and hugged the teddy bear closer. In her eyes, for the first time, I saw a faint glimmer of trust. Then, I'll help you. I don't have much. Only a few of my mother's keepsakes. But maybe they'll take us further. She stood, went to the wooden cabinet against the wall, and pulled out a small cardboard box. Opening it, she revealed a few photos, some letters, and a worn leather diary. Handing it to me, her voice shook. These are what my mother left behind. I never dared read them all. Each time I tried, I was afraid of finding something I couldn't bear. But maybe now it's time. My hands trembled as I took the diary. My fingers slid over the smudged ink, as if touching the beating heart of the woman named Laura, a woman I had never known, but who had become the most crucial link in my life. In my mind, Robert's words echoed from many years ago. Late one night, there are things you don't need to know. Kathy, knowing too much only brings pain. Back then I thought he was talking about work. Now, the words sounded like prophecy. I lifted my head, my eyes meeting Rachel's. We sat there, two women from two generations, bound by an invisible thread. And I knew these diary pages might not only reveal the truth, but could forever change the way I saw my marriage and the man I had lived beside for more than half a lifetime. I gently opened the diary. The smell of old paper rose up, musty, like the breath of a long past time. The first page showed a faded date, the handwriting soft and even October. 1999. Today I saw Kathy again. She came by with a few things, and we sat together for a long time. I went cold. My name Kathy appeared clearly, right on the first line. I hurriedly flipped through the next pages, my eyes reading while my heart raced. Kathy said she understood me, that she held no resentment. I cried, and she held my hand tight. She said we are women who must bear a cruel truth together. My hand shook. I looked at Rachel and said, This can't be. I never met your mother. I never said these things. Rachel frowned, eyes wide. She pulled a small trunk from under the cabinet and pulled out a stack of yellowed envelopes. She grabbed one at random and handed it to me. Read it. This isn't just my mother's words. These are things she said you wrote. I took it and slid the paper out. The slanted, familiar handwriting, the loops on the O's. The cross on the T's was exactly like mine. At the end of the letter was a signature, Kathy Miller. I froze. I couldn't deny it. That handwriting was mine. But my memory was a blank. Not a single fragment of sitting with Laura or writing these letters remained. No, it can't be, I muttered. My voice stuck in my throat. Someone forged my handwriting. Or, or maybe, I left the sentence hanging because the thought that followed made my skin crawl. Could it be that I really had met Laura? He really written these letters, and then forgotten? Rachel sat across from me, staring as if she could read the tangle in my mind. My mother never lied. She always believed she would return someday. If she said she never met you, then why do these letters exist? I had no answer. My mind felt like a knotted thread. The tighter I tried to pull it apart, the more it tangled. I remembered the early 2000s, when Robert took me to see a neurologist after the car accident. I had been unconscious for days. The doctor had said I might suffer temporary memory loss. But Robert had always reassured me that I recovered fully, that there was nothing to worry about. Now I began to suspect, perhaps during that time I lived another life. Met Laura. Wrote these letters, and all of it was wiped from my memory. I gripped the letter, tears blurring my vision. Rachel, I swear to you. In my memory, this is the first time we've met. But if what your mother wrote and these letters are true, then perhaps a portion of my life has been stolen from my memory. Rachel was silent. She didn't accuse, she didn't condemn, she simply looked at me with a mixture of bewilderment and sympathy. She reached out and touched the letter in my hand, her voice trembling slightly. Do you think Robert wanted you to forget? That question struck like a hammer to my mind. I choked, my heart aching. Robert, the man I trusted for more than 40 years, could he have known everything and chosen to hide it at any cost? The air in the small room seemed to thicken. I could hear the clock ticking, and my own quick breaths. I closed the diary and held it tight against my chest, as if afraid it would vanish. A fear I had never known rose up inside me, not just fear of Robert's secrets, but of the possibility that I, Kathy Miller, had lived a part of my life I now could not remember at all. And I knew. From this moment on, my search for the truth was no longer only about uncovering what Robert had hidden. It was also about confronting myself. Who am I? And what have I forgotten in my own life? The next day I returned home. The road back seemed twice as long, the wind whining against the car window like whispered secrets, touching my heart with each passing breath. When the key turned in the lock and the door opened, the smell of old wood and dried cinnamon from the familiar kitchen greeted me, but instead of bringing peace, it made me feel suffocated. This house suddenly held more questions than I could bear. I went straight up to the attic, where it had all begun. The wooden stairs creaked under my feet. The sound like a reminder. This is where everything started. I stood a moment before the door, took a deep breath, then turned the knob. Late afternoon light poured through the small window, dust drifting in the air. I knelt down and searched for the gap in the old floorboard where I had once hidden the first photograph. The wood was brittle. Splinters came away as I pried it up. Underneath, there was not just an empty space as I had thought. A small cardboard box appeared, dusty but intact. I fumbled the box up, brushed away the dull dust, and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs, neatly stacked as if someone had carefully kept them. I pulled out the first one. Rachel, very small, about 4 or 5 years old, standing under an apple tree. Hair tied, slightly crooked. Her eyes shining exactly like in the photo I had seen. I took another. Rachel, older, maybe 10. Sitting and reading in an unfamiliar room I didn't recognize. I froze. My hand trembled so badly the photo almost slipped to the floor. Then the third photo. My heart nearly stopped. In that picture, Rachel looked about 13 or 14. And beside her was me. Clearly, unmistakably, with brown hair falling to my shoulders. That familiar face. That look in my eyes, it was me. I set the photo on my knee and stared, as if, by staring long enough, the image might change. But it didn't. It was me. Not someone who looked like me, it was me. No, it can't be, I murmured. my mind reeling. I tried to find an explanation, a forgery, a doctored photo, but the photo was old. The paper yellowed, with no signs of tampering. Every detail was real down to the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes. Memories flickered like shadows, stabbing at my mind. A strange yard. Children's laughter. A small hand holding mine, but whenever I tried to grasp them, they vanished like smoke. I kept rifling through the other photos. All of them showed Rachel at different ages, and in several, I appeared standing beside her, sitting close, even placing a hand on the girl's shoulder like a mother full of affection. Fear welled up so tightly, it felt as if someone was squeezing my chest. I dropped to the floor, hands over my head. Was I really there? I asked myself. Why don't I remember? I shut my eyes and let the tears fall. In that moment, I remembered the times Robert avoided my gaze. The vague way he would say, "Kathy, there are things you don't need to know." Had he hidden not only the truth about Laura and Rachel, but also pieces of my own memory? I opened my eyes and looked again at the spread of photos across the floor. Rachel's faces emerged through the years like a film rewinding. The girl grew up, and I in the pictures was always there, a silent witness. A cold thought sliced through me. If I really had met Rachel and been present in her life, why had that memory been erased? Was it the old accident? Or had Robert arranged everything, shielding me from a part of my life he didn't want me to face? I gripped a photo so hard, my hands trembled. My face in it wasn't posed, it was full of genuine tenderness, a real feeling. In the quiet attic, with only a distant clock ticking, I felt myself standing at the edge of a vast abyss. A part of my life, a vague maternal love, a secret stretching across decades, all waiting for me to piece them together. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder, perhaps I wasn't only the betrayed wife, not only a victim of a hidden secret, maybe I was also part of the secret itself. I sat for hours in the dusty attic, photographs scattered around me like evidence of a life I could not recall. 100 questions intertwined in my head like a maze with no exit. I had been there. I had taken those pictures with Rachel. But why was my mind blank? I knew that to find answers I couldn't cling only to vague memories or the lines in Laura's diary. I needed confirmation from someone who had witnessed it, from someone who'd been with Robert in those years. And the only name that came to mind was Harold Benson, Robert's longtime lawyer and close friend. I remembered the last time I'd seen him at the funeral. He sat in a back pew, silent, his tired eyes showing fatigue. Yet whenever he looked at me, there was something like hesitation, like concealment. Back then, I was too grief-stricken to notice. Now, thinking back, that look felt like a warning. The next morning I called to make an appointment. Harold's voice on the line was hoarse, surprised to hear my name. But he agreed. "If you'd like, come to my old office tomorrow at noon. I'm no longer practicing, but I still keep some files to sort out. We can talk." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My heart pounded. Harold's office was on the second floor of a red brick building overlooking the town square. When I entered, the smell of old paper and polished wood filled the room, reminding me of Robert from years before, when he would always say, "Harold is the man I trust." Absolutely. Harold stood and slowly took my hand. His palm was rough. He squeezed lightly, then let go as if afraid that holding on too long would reveal something. We sat down. The oak desk between us, an invisible boundary. I didn't beat around the bush. I put the photo I'd found in the attic, the one of me standing beside Rachel, on the table. My voice trembled but was decisive. "Harold, I need the truth. I want to know what happened." He stared at the picture, his aged eyes blinking. A long silence made the air heavy. Then he sighed and wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Kathy, I hoped you would never have to see these things. But I have." I cut in, trying to stay calm. And I need you to tell me everything. Harold was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward, speaking slowly as if weighing every word. Many years ago, after the car accident, you suffered a fairly serious head injury. The doctor said there was a high chance you'd have temporary memory loss. Robert took you for psychological treatment. And during that time, you frequently met with a woman named Laura Jennings. My chest tightened at that name. I didn't interrupt. I just gripped my hands together. You and Laura. Harold hesitated, as if what he was about to say was difficult to put into words. The two of you became very close. Not a passing friendship, but a rare bond. You shared everything: pain, loneliness, hopes. Laura once told me she felt like a sister she never had. I shivered. Part of me wanted to believe it. Part of me was afraid. And Rachel? I asked, my voice tight. Harold nodded slightly. It was during that time you met Rachel many times. You loved that child genuinely, as if she were part of you. And I remember clearly, once Laura came to see me and gave me a handwritten document. She had signed it. The document stated that if Laura were to die one day, you would be the one to care for Rachel. I was stunned. The room spun. I bowed my head and whispered, I signed. I promised that. Yes, Harold said softly. But as your memory recovered, everything related to Laura and Rachel vanished from your mind. Robert, he knew. He worried that bringing it up would cause you pain and confusion. He chose to bury it all so your marriage would not fracture. I let out a bitter laugh, and the tears came. Fracture? What about the truth? What of anything left intact? Harold said nothing. He simply sat there, shoulders bowed under the weight of holding a secret too long. I inhaled, wiped my tears, and looked him in the eye. Why, tell me now. Harold's gaze softened. Because Robert is dead, and because you found out. I knew that one day it would all be exposed. The office was utterly silent. I could hear the wall clock ticking, each click like a hammer blow in my mind. Images of Laura, the woman I had apparently thought of like a sister, now erased from memory, rose up. I saw Rachel's face, the girl's eyes pleading for a truth. And now, through Harold's words, I had to admit I once knew everything. I once made promises. I once was bound to them. Only, I had forgotten. I stood, thanked Harold in a choked voice, and stepped outside. Afternoon sunlight flooded the square, golden and aching. People passed and smiled. Children played. And I, a 66-year-old woman, felt like a stranger in my own life. And I understood from now on. Every step I took would not only be to uncover the truth about Robert, but to reclaim the piece of memory that had been taken from me. A part of my life that could change the meaning of the years I have left. That afternoon I drove home in silence. The road seemed endlessly long. The trees beside it, casting drifting shadows across the car's windshield, as if each branch and streak of light were whispering reminders of what I had heard from Harold. Deep down, I felt as if I had just collapsed. When the gate closed behind me, the house no longer felt like a refuge. The brick walls and the neat rows of family photos on the wall turned into a prison of memories. I trudged into the living room and sat in the familiar armchair. Inside me, a frantic knock kept sounding. Rachel is not my child, but I used to be the person closest to her. I took out the photographs from the attic and spread them on the table. Each picture felt like a small dagger twisting into my mind. Rachel, a little girl growing older by the years, and me present beside her. Not just once, but again and again. Smiles, touches, looks full of tenderness. If a stranger saw them, they would certainly assume mother and biological daughter. Tears streamed down my face and fell onto a photo. I didn't know if I was crying out of anger at Robert, for pity for Rachel, or out of hatred for myself. How could I forget everything I whispered? How could I abandon a child I once promised to protect? In a panic, I grabbed one of the letters from the stack Laura left behind. The handwriting was mine, or at least identical to mine, clear on the page. Kathy, if one day you no longer remember, I only hope these letters will bring you back. Rachel needs you, and I believe you will never abandon her. Reading that, I burst into sobs. I felt betrayed by Robert, by my own brain, and overwhelmed with guilt. For years, Rachel grew up, lost her mother, and lived with the fragile belief that a woman somewhere would return. That woman was me. Yet I didn't remember. I never showed up. I pictured Laura on her sickbed, holding her daughter's hand and whispering, "One day, she will come to find you. You are not alone." And Rachel, that small child, believed it. Meanwhile, I lived peacefully in this house, believing my marriage, despite small cracks, was intact. I had no idea that in another town, a little girl waited for me, waiting for a promise to be kept. Pain and shame crashed over me at once, squeezing my breath away. I wanted to scream at Robert for hiding things, and I wanted to curse myself for being unable to remember. That night, I could not sleep. I walked through the house, opened every cabinet, touched every object, as if searching for what else might be hidden. But everything was silent, just me and the ticking clock. Around 3 a.m., I went out to the porch and sat on the wooden chair, staring at the star-filled sky. The cool air kept me alert, but my heart remained heavy. I closed my eyes, and the image of little Rachel returned, the child, running to hug me, the woman in the photograph, and calling, "Mom." That call echoed, and my heart felt crushed. I opened my eyes and whispered to myself, "Rachel is not my biological daughter, but she once belonged to me. I promised. I forgot. And now I must face it." Part of me wanted to run away, deny everything, pretend I had never known Laura or Rachel. But another part, the stronger part, whispered that if I turned my back again, I would never forgive myself. I packed the photos carefully into a small box. On the lid, I wrote a single word, Rachel, because I knew, sooner or later, I would have to face that girl. I would have to tell her that I remembered, at least in part, and that I was not the careless person she might think I was. As dawn began to break and soft light slipped through the window, I sat there with the box on my lap. I was exhausted and drained. But one thing was clear: this journey was not over. What I had uncovered was only the first layer of the truth. Behind it, there were likely more painful things waiting. I whispered to myself, as if speaking to my own soul, "Kathy, you were once part of this secret, and now you have no choice but to face it." A morning breeze stirred the leaves in the garden. I hugged the photo box tighter, feeling my heart beat slow but grow resolute. I am no longer just the betrayed wife. I am no longer only a victim. I am someone who once promised, who once cared. And now, however belatedly, I must reclaim what I have lost. A few days later, I returned to Maplewood, still weighed down, but this time with a quiet resolve. I didn't know what I would say to Rachel, or whether she even wanted to hear me, but I understood that if I kept hiding, I would become a faded shadow of myself. When I knocked, Rachel opened the door with eyes half guarded, half hopeful. The old teddy bear still sat on the small chair in the living room, a silent witness to so many memories. I sat in the chair opposite, my hands clenched together. "Rachel." I saw Harold, Robert's lawyer. I began. He told me everything. I promised your mother I would take care of you if she wasn't here." Rachel froze, her eyes wide, her face showing hurt and surprise. She whispered, "So, my mother wasn't lying." I nodded, each word cutting deep. "But I don't remember. Rachel, the accident took my memory. And Robert, he chose to hide it all. I didn't know until I found the photos and the letters. The room fell silent. Rachel bowed her head, fingers worrying the teddy bear. After a long while, she went to the wooden cabinet, took out an old yellow envelope, and set it gently in front of me. "This is what my mother left for you." I never opened it, because she wrote plainly, "Only give to Kathy." I hesitated, my hand shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded paper. When I unfolded it, I realized it wasn't an ordinary letter but a handwritten will. Laura's soft handwriting stretched clearly and decisively across the lines. Laura Jennings. Leave all my assets to my daughter, Rachel. But there is something more important than all that. I want Kathy Miller to be my daughter's spiritual guardian. Not in finances, but in heart. I believe only Kathy can give Rachel the comfort and strength to go on when I am no longer here. I read it again and again, my eyes blurring with tears. My heart raced, frightened and aching. Those words were like Laura's arms reaching from far away, placing responsibility on my shoulders. Rachel watched me closely, her voice breaking. "My mother trusted you that much, but you once forgot me." Her words choked me. I had no excuse. The truth was, I had been absent during the years she needed me most. Even if the reason was erased memory, that gap remained undeniable. I touched the edge of the envelope, then looked up at Rachel, my voice trembling. "I can't change the past, Rachel. All I can say is that if I had known, if I had remembered, I would not have abandoned you." She was silent for a long time, eyes flashing with anger, then softening. Finally, she exhaled, voice thick. "I used to think you were the enemy, the woman who stole my father from my mother. But now, everything is more complicated." I nodded, the pain rising like a wave. "I used to think I was only a victim," I replied. "But it turns out I've been part of this story for a long time." Rachel turned to the window. Afternoon light fell across her face, making her brown eyes even deeper. "I don't know if I can forgive you right away," she said slowly, "but I won't deny what my mother wrote. If you truly want to, prove it to me." Her words, though cool, planted a small spark. The door wasn't shut. Perhaps this was my chance to mend what had long been torn. I clutched the will in my hands, feeling its weight heavy and sacred. Laura had given me her final trust, a faith I had lost to blurry memory and Robert's silence. Now it had come back and forced me to choose: keep avoiding, or step into the role I once promised. However belatedly, Rachel turned back, her eyes a little softer, but still wary. She whispered, "My mother used to say, when you see Kathy, look into her eyes. If there is truth, you will know." Now that I look, I see real pain. My chest tightened. I wanted to take her in my arms, but I knew it wasn't the time. I only nodded, a tear falling onto the will, soaking the words, "spiritual guardian." In that moment I realized, maybe Laura saw something in me even I didn't see. And now, even though memories were in pieces, I had to stand up because my responsibility wasn't just to myself, but to a young woman who looked to me as her last hope. The day Rachel moved to live nearby, the whole neighborhood seemed to change. Her little blue house was only a few streets from mine, close enough that most mornings I could see her kitchen light glowing through the window, but far enough that we each had our own space. I helped her unpack, carrying box after box of books and clothes. And as I worked, I felt something strange in that small house. The laughter and voices of youth returned, and my old heart grew warm. That night, after I came home, I went up to the familiar attic. No matter how many times I climbed those stairs, my hands still trembled. I sat down, opened the old box, and took out the first photograph, the one that started it all. The little girl, with bright eyes, clutching a teddy bear, standing in front of the old house. I ran my fingers lightly over that face and whispered, "If it's fate, then she really has come back." The whisper dissolved into the quiet. But inside me, it rang true. Day by day, Rachel visited more often. Sometimes she brought freshly baked cookies. Sometimes she simply sat on the porch with me, drinking tea in silence. Even in that silence, I felt an invisible thread between us, linking generations, connecting past and present. One afternoon, Rachel set another small box on the table. She said, "I found this in my mother's old boxes. Maybe you should see it." Inside were a few photos I had never seen. One showed me sitting in the garden with Laura, both of us laughing as Rachel ran around. I swayed, hardly able to believe my eyes. I, the woman who had always insisted she'd never met Laura, was clearly there in that moment, smiling gently, as if it had been everyday life. Rachel looked at me with a mixture of expectation and bewilderment. I hugged the photo, a vague fear rising. The more evidence that surfaced, the more I realized my memory might have hidden even more. That night, after Rachel left, I sat alone in the attic, the yellow light spilling over the spread of photographs. I trembled and asked myself if other pieces of memory are still waiting somewhere in the dark. Will I have the strength to face them? How many secrets did Robert leave behind? How many things did Laura entrust? How many promises did I once make and now cannot remember? The night wind slid through the window crack, carrying a sharp chill. I shivered. I hugged the first photograph to my chest and closed my eyes. Images of Rachel as a child and as an adult braided through my mind. Perhaps this journey isn't truly over. My greatest fear is no longer simply what Robert hid, but myself, the part of my memory I lost, and whether it can ever be fully recovered. In that old attic, in the stillness of midnight, I sighed. I felt as if I had found a family again. But I also stood at the threshold of deeper, darker secrets. And I wondered, if that day returned, would I have the courage to live it all again? To keep the promises Laura entrusted and that Rachel still waits for. Maybe for now, I can only stop and breathe with myself. The hovering memories, the secrets woven between kinship, friendship, and betrayal, they make me ask, if you were in my place, would you have the courage to face the truth, even if it could overturn everything you once believed? Would you stay silent to preserve a fragile peace? Or would you go to the end to reclaim the lost pieces of memory? I would like to hear your thoughts, because everyone has a different view and their own answer. And perhaps, within those answers, we'll find some empathy for the unseen wounds. If this story touches you, follow the channel to walk with me through other journeys, pieces of family life where love and trust are sometimes harshly tested, but where we also learn to rise and find ourselves again. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening and for accompanying me through every breath of this story. Your presence has made my journey less alone.